It's Monday, and the third free region pack for City Skylines 2 is here, and this time we're taking a trip to the UK. This pack is huge, and it covers new ground that no other region pack has, but more on that in just a moment. This pack was created by two absolutely amazing asset creators, Mac Welshman and Rick 4000. If those names sound familiar, it's because they were both prolific asset creators for City Skylines 1. Mac Welshman's made some of the most popular assets in the Steam workshop. You might remember the Winona Terrace that I used in Lake Valley. That was one of his creations. But he's also known for creating a number of brilliant UK-inspired assets. Rick 4000 is behind many of the top UK assets and collections. My personal favorite is the UK Holiday Park. I even planned on using it in my Clearwater County build at one point in time. Not like all the other region packs, this one is high quality. But what sets it apart, and what I think many of you are going to be incredibly excited about, is that this is the first pack to include low-density homes. And in my opinion, they're some of the finest low-density homes in the game. But it includes not just one type, but two. And I can't wait to show them all to you. In total, this pack includes 6 new zoning categories that include 525 new growable assets, 22 signature buildings, 8 service buildings, and 78 props. Yes, this is the first region pack that includes props. That's 633 assets, including the props, making this by far the largest region pack yet. So in this video, I'll cover how to get the assets, where to find them in-game, I'll give you a tour of each asset, I'll show you what makes these assets special, and I'll show you where I think they would look great in your city, though it'll just be a thought experiment here in Magnolia County. And if you're enjoying these region pack deep dives, hit the like button and comment with your favorite asset from the pack below. Or leave an emoji representing where you're from for the sake of engagement. And without further ado, let's jump right in. To add this region pack to your game, head to Paradox Mods either from a web browser or from in-game and search for UK pack. Now before we add this, I've got to point out that this is a nearly 7 gig download. That means that this is twice the size of the French pack and 7 times the size of the German pack. So if space is a consideration, just know that this is very, very large. All of that said, I do think it is worth it, and if you want to add it, click on the add button right here, and then select the playset that you want to add it to. And as soon as you add it to a playset and hit close, it'll begin downloading. Before we take a look at each of the assets individually, I wanted to showcase all of them on this sprawling grid so that you have an idea of the size of all the assets in this pack. I'm also hoping that this can be a resource for you if you're zoning things in, so that you'll know the size of the assets for each of the zoning categories. That said, this isn't all of the assets. And that's because generally, assets have unique buildings for levels 1, levels 3, and levels 5. Level 2 is a copy of level 1 with some additional propping, and it's the same thing for level 4. It's a copy of level 3 with some additional propping. But for some assets in this pack, what you'll see is that the buildings are rotated or mirrored, which makes it feel like there are more assets in this pack. This occurs with the medium and high density buildings, and it does make the areas that have medium and high density buildings feel much more diverse, considering it wouldn't necessarily be unusual to have these buildings mirrored or rotated. So I think it was a great design decision. And all of this is to say that I'm only showing the levels 1, 3, and 5 buildings here, so there are 192 more assets than are shown right here in this grid. This is only 333. So first and foremost, the roads heading east-west separate the assets by their depth. The roads heading north-south separate the assets by their category. So at the top left, we have low-density detached housing. These are basically single-family homes. Next to that, we have low-density semi-detached housing. These are basically duplexes. In the next row, we have medium-density terraced housing. This is basically row homes. To the right of that, we have mixed housing. These are basically what you'd see in a neighborhood main street. And to the right of that, we have medium-density housing. And in the next row, we have high-density housing, and to the right of that, we have signature buildings. And relative to the other region packs, I've placed these in a different location because we have props that come with this pack as well. The next row has the service buildings, and the final row has all of the props. But as you can tell, there are obviously a lot of assets in this pack. So let's dive into each of them. And we begin with the zoning category that I think a lot of people are going to be excited to see: single-family detached homes. Now, this is a category that was not present in either the German or the French region packs. And honestly, these are some absolutely fantastic assets. I think that these might be the best single-family assets in the game right now. Now, before we dive into each of these assets, I just want to give you an overview of how many you're getting with this pack. From this road to this road, these are all our single-family assets. And what you might notice is that most of these assets are 5 units deep. So if you want the greatest variety of homes, Make sure that you've got at least 5 units deep for your neighborhoods. And if you go to 6, you only get 2 homes. So you might just want to stick with zoning 5 units deep. Now, there are a few assets that are 2 units deep, 3 units deep, and 4 units deep. But one thing I really like about this asset pack is the way that they've added a bit of diversity here. So you can tell that this 3 unit deep series of assets is the same as this 5 unit deep series of assets. And what's nice about that is if you're creating a neighborhood and you're kind of haphazardly zoning, you won't end up with a bunch of homes that don't look right because the lot depth is just a little bit different. Because these are the same asset on a different lot size, they'll end up looking really natural, which is something that I really, really appreciate. Now, one of the things that I adore about these assets is the way that they level up. You can see that things just get more elaborate in terms of the building itself and the backyard and the propping as you progress through the levels. So right here we have a level 1 building, and they must not have a dryer because they got a clothesline out back. They've also got some garden beds and a shed, but it's a pretty bare bones backyard. As we go to the level 3 building, we get a much more elaborate backyard and a small addition to the house. As we get to the level 5 building, we get our second addition to the house, and they end up with an accessory dwelling unit or like a detached office or something like that. And it's a much more elaborate backyard and a much more elaborate house. And like I said, regardless of the asset size, it is like that. This is one of the 6 unit deep lots. And you can see they basically get a guest house on this one. And these are just beautiful assets. Absolutely stunningly beautiful assets. And I think my favorite thing about all of these assets is that I could really see them existing in a variety of locations. Some of these assets scream out UK to me. Some of them scream out Chicago. Some of them scream out Atlanta. Some of them scream out West Coast US. I could see using these in Australia or New Zealand. There are just so many places where I think that these assets are going to fit. So if you have a build in any part of the world, I think that you're going to find an asset in this pack in the low density single family housing that is going to work for you, because these are all really, really nice assets that I think fit in a variety of locations. Next up, we have our semi-detached low density. These are duplexes, and I can't express to you how excited I am to see duplexes in the game. This is something that I've always thought should be in City Skylines, and now we have the ability to zone duplexes, which is really important because in many new neighborhoods, you'll have a mixture of homes, single family duplexes, row homes, apartments, all of them mixed together, and you have a transition of densities, and this is going to allow you to have that transition. Now, a couple of things to know about these. First of all, there are a lot of assets here, but most of the assets are either 4 units deep or 6 units deep. There aren't as many 5 units deep assets. There are 0 3 unit deep assets and just 2 assets that are 2 units deep. Now, if you zone the 2 unit deep assets, they do not have parking, so keep that in mind. You may need to either provide parking or be okay with a lot of on-street parking. For all the other assets, there are garages or at least parking bays or carports. And the assets are absolutely beautiful. So when you go to the 4 unit deep assets, they're a little bit more basic. And as you get to the larger lot assets, they become really ornate, kind of the thing you might expect to see in a suburban area when you have a suburban duplex. Now, one thing that I absolutely love about these assets is that in many cases, the left and the right-hand sides of the assets are not exactly the same. So you'll see that, like right here, it looks like we have stucco on one side and some sort of brick facade on the other. And that's because it's different owners that own the different sides of the duplex, which is very realistic, and I absolutely love it. And you kind of see that across the board. And when you have owner-occupied duplexes or semi-detached homes, that's what I would expect to see. You'd have a firewall in between these, and as a result, the exterior facades would change over time as the ownership changes of them. And that extends to the fences and the propping. It's all very detailed, and it all feels like there are multiple owners of the building, which honestly feels really, really good. But what I think I love most about these is that some cities are beginning to do away with single family zoning, and they're allowing additional density in places where there were single family homes. And I can imagine zoning a whole bunch of those single family detached homes and then rezoning with these and having homes that look very similar to those single family detached homes that we just took a look at, but have twice as much density. Even though they look like they are single family homes in a suburban context, you're going to fit twice as many people in these neighborhoods if you zone using these buildings. Next up, we have medium density terraced housing. And when I think of London, for instance, I often think of these sorts of buildings. These are basically row homes that have been smashed together, so you end up with either a set of 3 or 4 row homes whenever you place one of these buildings. Now, there aren't all that many of these assets. In fact, this right here is all of them. To the left of this road, these are the mid-block pieces, and these are the corner pieces. So not all that many of them. They're also either 2, 3, or 4 units deep. There are no 5 or 6 unit deep buildings, and all of the corners are 2 by 2. Now, in terms of the look of the asset, you really have 2 different flavors. You either have assets that have a uniform brick front, or those that have different facades for each of the units. Now, right here, you can tell that there are 3 units in this one. That is like that for most of these. Most of these are 2 units wide. However, the 3 unit wide pieces and the corners all have 4 units. And then in terms of leveling up, these are much like the other assets. Though you can't always see what's happening from the front, as you go from level 1 to level 3, there are building additions, same with level 3 to level 5. It's very obvious to see in the front of these two that it looks like we have a finished attic right here, so that is the addition. But as you look at the back, you can see that there's been addition into the rear yard here, and it's been even more increased in this one. And in terms of the propping, what you see is that we've got elaborate patios as you go from level 1 to level 3 and level 3 to level 5. So I love that bit of continuity that we see throughout all of these assets. Next, we have some assets that I think might be the most fascinating assets in the game, and honestly, some of my favorite in this entire pack: mixed housing. So one of the interesting things about these assets is that most of them are 4 units deep. So if you are zoning 5 and 6 unit deep lots, you will not have anything spawn. You'll have a whole bunch of these 4 unit deep buildings spawn. If you zone 2 or 3 units deep, you're only going to get 1 asset to spawn. So keep that in mind. Now, one of the reasons that I love these assets is that these are kind of row home looking assets that you could fit in a variety of locations. But I think they'll also fit a variety of contexts. So some of these look very UK, which is great. These right here kind of remind me of some of the French pack buildings. And then as we go on, some of these remind me of small town US or neighborhood Main Street in the US. These would fit in so many builds, and they're absolutely beautiful assets. Now, as we make our way over to these, they're interesting because the assets are very similar, and I could see using these, like throwing in one of these 2 unit deep assets and then having a parking lot behind it if you wanted to tuck the parking behind it, because it looks very similar to this one. So I think that that's how I would probably use it. And some of these, like these right here, are the kinds of assets that I would expect to see in basically any North American city and many other places throughout the world. So again, very, very flexible assets. They fit together very nicely, and they allow you to make a nice, dense, walkable Main Street area. I love these so much. Next up, we have medium density housing, and I have a feeling that a lot of people are going to love these assets. First and foremost, they're not that tall, at least in their base form. So if you're playing with Plop the Growables, you'll be able to lock these in at 3 stories, which I think is absolutely exceptional, or 4 stories right here. But even at their tallest level, you're looking at a 5-story building, which is pretty reasonable. There's also a good variety of asset sizes. These are all of the assets, and you can see that whether you're going for 2 units, 3 units, 4 units, or 5 units deep, there's a good variety of assets. The only asset size that doesn't have a lot of variety really is the 6 unit deep assets. One of the things that I love about these assets is that regardless of the size, you can find groupings of assets that are going to look nice together. So we've got a 2x2 right here that looks just like a 2x3, and like this 4 unit deep asset right here. This is a 2x5 unit asset. And one thing that's excellent about this is you'll notice that there's no parking, which gives you the opportunity to choose how the parking sits for this asset. It gives you the opportunity to make your own custom apartment complex, which is amazing. And if you don't want to do that, go for a slightly bigger building and it will come with the parking. It's really flexible, and that's something I really appreciate. It lets you build the way that you want to build. Now, one interesting thing about these series of assets is that this right here, this is intentional. What you're seeing is that this building in the level 1 form is rotated. And the reason it's rotated is because when you have a whole bunch of these side by side, it gives you a little bit more diversity in terms of the building. So even though it's the exact same building, it's going to look different from above because it's rotated. And you'll notice that throughout this entire series, there are some buildings that are just situated slightly differently, which I think is really nice if you're just zoning a gigantic area with the exact same type of building. Now, it's pretty clear to see here that the higher the building level, the taller the building gets. And this really makes me wish that we had a historical building setting within the vanilla game, because bluntly, you're going to end up at a point where all of these hit level 5 and they're all the maximum height, which is kind of unfortunate. The other final thought that I have about these is there are 3 assets that seem a little bit out of place. They seem a little bit taller than the rest of the medium density buildings. And though they're nice looking assets, they are much taller. So I will probably play a little bit of whack-a-mole to eliminate these ones where I don't want this much height. And then we have our final zone category, high density housing. And these are pretty generic looking high density buildings that I think would fit in basically any city. These are all of them. Everything you see right here is all the high density buildings. Very similar to the medium density. Some of them are going to spin around. Some of the narrower buildings don't have parking, but have a wider variant that has more parking. And you're going to see very similar assets. And in this case, it's interesting. When you see an asset like this one, again, it's just that this one doesn't have parking and this one does. Right here, these look similar. This one is slightly wider than this one is. This is a 2-unit wide. This is a 3-unit wide. So I think it opens up opportunities to do stuff like this. This building actually appears to be this building, but kind of clipped into itself. And that's the kind of thing that I guess I'm really looking forward to doing with these buildings. In particular, some of these unique asset sizes, like this one is 2 by 5. I really can't wait to grab a couple of these and maybe take one of these buildings right here, clip it on both sides, and make it appear that this is the walkway in between the buildings. In terms of the size, most of these assets are 5 units deep, but because there's a lot of repeats, a lot of what you're seeing with the 5-unit deep building are the 3 and the 2-unit deep buildings with parking. So I think that if you zone in an area, you're gonna get a good variety of buildings. Some of them will be rotated and they're gonna look all right next to each other. They've also got at least 3 different colors. So if you zone in a whole area with these high density buildings, it's gonna look just fine. Very nice looking assets, not a ton of them, kind of generic looking, which I think is completely fine. Next, we have the city service buildings, and there aren't as many in this set as in the other 2 sets, but I think that the assets that we get are probably going to be some of the most useful assets for a broad swath of people. And that's just because of the way that they look, the capacity of the buildings, and how much they cost. So in general, these wholesale replace some of the vanilla buildings. They have the exact same specs, and some of the upgrade paths, in my opinion, make more sense and occur more elegantly. So right here, we have our medical practice. This is just a small clinic, but this has 150 patient capacity and 2 ambulances. This is basically the exact same as the medical clinic that you would get with the vanilla game, but it has an extra 50 patient capacity and 2 less ambulances. But it's not a big deal because you can add on this ambulance station, which adds 30 more patient capacity and 4 ambulances. And look at that, it occurs right within the footprint of the building. You also have this ward extension, which gives you 30 more patient capacity, bringing you up to 210 and 6 ambulances. And it all occurs within the footprint of this building. And I think that it just looks absolutely outstanding. This is how I think many of the upgrades should occur within the footprint of the building, or if you snap them onto the sides, they should feel like they should be on the sides, or they should connect elegantly with the building itself. And this is what I wanted to see, and all the assets do it. Next up, we've got a hospital. This has a 500 patient capacity with 30 ambulances. It's the exact same as this hospital back here. The big difference is that this, to me, looks a lot more like a hospital that I would see. So excited about this asset because of that. You also have a couple of additions. You have a cancer care center, which adds 100 patient capacity, adds it right onto the side. You also get this child's ward, adds it onto the side here, and you end up with this gigantic, very elegant looking hospital. You can't add on to the number of ambulances though, so I guess keep that in mind. Next up, we have an asset that I think many people are going to be very excited about. This is a church, but in particular, it's also a cemetery. So this is a small cemetery. By default, it has 100 capacity, but you have the ability to add on to it. And that's why when you place this asset, it looks wider than it really is. And that's because you can add these extensions on, and these add an additional 50 storage capacity and additional 8 processing capacity when you add these on. So this is a different kind of death care solution than we've had before. I think that this lives somewhere in between the crematorium and this gigantic cemetery. And honestly, I just love the way that this looks. To me, this looks a lot more like what I'd expect to see in a smaller town. I've always thought that this cemetery was just way too big, and this is a really nice compromise. And interestingly, this asset is actually a tourist attraction as well. +3 tourism gives you 2 well-being within 300 meters, and it's not all that expensive. So I have a feeling that people are going to drop this thing all over the place. I know that I will. And now we get to our schools. And one thing that's really exciting is we get 2 new elementary schools. So we've got this urban primary school, 500 student capacity, kind of similar to the new small elementary school that we got. But the big difference is that there is an upgrade path here that makes this a really exceptional elementary school. So within the footprint of the building, we can add 500 more student capacity. So now it has 1,000. And I can add this extension classroom on and get 50 more. So this is a very small, very high capacity elementary school that's not 15 stories tall. It's a very elegant looking building. So I really, really like this one. And next to this, we've got a suburban primary school. Now by default, these actually have the exact same cost, but the capacity of this one is double. I don't really understand why that is the case, but I'm not going to complain about it. And one thing that I do love is that I can add onto it. So I can add an extension wing onto this, 500 additional student capacity right here, and I can add on extra classrooms, 50 more, all of it occurring within the footprint of the building. And what that means is that these are comparable in terms of size and capacity to the vanilla elementary school that came with the game that kind of always looked too tall and kind of goofy, and this small one that has the extensions that to me don't make a lot of sense. So these are wonderful assets. And I do want you to know, you might be wondering why there's no grass, because so many assets have the grass. It's because many assets that come with this pack don't have grass included. So if you are not a fan of the grass textures, you're going to love using these elementary schools. You're going to love using this high school that we're about to take a look at as well, because it doesn't have it except for at the soccer field. So this right here is the high school, and just look at this thing. This to me looks a lot like a high school that I would expect to see. It's very sprawling. It's lower in height. It just feels like a high school that I'm used to seeing. It's already got a sports stadium built in. It's got football or soccer. It's got a track back here. It just looks really, really good. Small parking lot included, and it has an upgrade path. So this has 1,500 student capacity, which is roughly double the vanilla high school. But you can also add on an indoor sports building, which will give you 15 more capacity. This one is not attached to it. It's kind of off on the side, which is fine, design choice. And then we've also got a technology wing. This adds another 400 capacity. This one, again, is a building that is not directly attached to the high school, but I think it's completely fine. And all said and done, you have almost 2,000 capacity with this building, and it just looks really, really good. This will fit a variety of contexts, whether it's a small town, an urban place, or a relatively rural area. I think it's going to fit in so many areas so well. And then finally, we have our last 2 city service buildings, a regular fire station and a regular police station. There is no headquarters variant for this pack, and honestly, I think it's just fine. So this right here has a capacity of 4 vehicles, very similar to the vanilla firehouse, and you have the ability to add on to it. So you can add on some extra garages and get 3 more fire trucks, and you can add on this training facility, which will give you 2 more. The building gets a little bit bigger. It looks a little bit more grand. It's all within the footprint of the building. I love this so much. Looks so natural, so detailed, and honestly, it's not all that much bigger than this one. It seems rational for a variety of contexts. In terms of the police station, it's much the same thing. In its default state, it's basically identical to the vanilla police station. It does have an upgrade path as well, so you can add on 5 jail capacity and 4 patrol cars with this upgrade right here. And with this upgrade, you can add on 15 more jail capacity if that's what you want to do. All of it occurring within the footprint of the building, just making it look a little bit more complete. And I just love that you have the ability to add these on within the footprint of the building, because it means that you're reusing architectural plans, which I think for a very utilitarian building like this, you might. And it means that you can have a little bit of variety if you don't have the additions in all of the buildings that you place in your city. And then just one more overview so you can see the difference in size between the UK assets and the vanilla assets. And you can see that in general, they are the same size or smaller, and the capacity is the same or greater. So I think that these assets are going to get a ton of use. I'm going to basically abandon this new small elementary school in favor of the elementary schools that came with this pack. Same thing with the high schools. Just very, very nice assets. Next, we'll take a look at the pack's 22 signature buildings. And if that sounds like a lot of signature buildings, it's because it is. It's actually more than the last 2 packs combined, so it's really great to see. These come in 3 categories: residential, mixed use, and commercial. And commercial is kind of the bulk of the pack. And I'm happy to see that because we still don't have a commercial zoning category for any of these region packs. So this kind of helps fill that hole a little bit. Let's start out with our residential buildings. Now we get 2 of those. We've got our executive mansion, which unlocks at milestone 1, and a UK city apartment building, which unlocks at milestone 8. Now, because these are residential buildings, their bonus is additional happiness within a radius, and there's nothing else. It's like that for all residential signature buildings. So these are very attractive buildings, though, very nice looking, lots of detail. And I love that you get this at milestone 1. Makes it feel like the founder of the city or someone really important, the mayor, could live in this building, and you could plop that right away. Next, we have mixed use buildings. And we have one of these. It is the Mixed Suburban Shops. This building unlocks at milestone 5. It's fairly simple. It's just kind of a suburban shopping center. And because it is a mixed-use building, it has a reduction in overall city import costs, an increase in overall citywide attractiveness, and an increase in happiness within a radius. Now, I'm going to mention this one time and one time only because all of the commercial buildings offer the same benefit. The only difference is the amount of happiness that it provides. I believe that the grocery store, this one provides 5 and not 3. The rest provide 3, and the distance changes. Other than that, the 1% reduction in import costs, the 1% increase in tourism attractiveness, that applies to all the commercial buildings and all the mixed-use buildings across all categories. Now, speaking of our commercial buildings, these come in a few different categories. One is gigantic grocery store. The second is inns. The third are pubs. And the fourth are petrol stations. So for the grocery store, this unlocks at milestone 8. And it's an absolutely beautiful asset. This is something that's been missing in the game. These are ubiquitous, at least in the US. In basically every community of every size, you end up with some sort of a grocery store like this that serves a good portion of the community. So I'm glad to see this in the game. The only thing that makes me sad is because it's a signature building, you can only place 1. At least if you're not using mods. If you are using mods, you can place more than 1, but with mods, you get 1 grocery store. Now you do get a number of pubs and inns and petrol stations, which I'm happy to see. Many of these are kind of similar. So we've got right here a 2-star country hotel, a 3-star country hotel, and a 5-star country hotel. And they all look fairly similar. So maybe you won't want to place all of these in your city. The main difference is the size of the asset itself. So you can see that this one right here, the 5-star, is considerably bigger. And then the other difference is basically the detail of the asset itself. So you can see that this one just has much more modest grounds, whereas these are really kind of pretty outlandish. You've got these really nice patios, lots of landscaping, looks really good. And then much like the buildings that level up, a big difference is the size of the building itself. You can see that the difference between this building and this one is there's an extension right here. This extension is still present on the 5-star hotel version, but it also gets this extension right here. So kind of a neat way to do these assets. And I love that it allows you to choose your own adventure, whether you decide to place all of them or just choose one and maybe level it up over time as you're telling the story of your city. Now, in terms of the pubs, there are really 2 different kinds. So this one right here kind of reminds me of like a Chili's or an Applebee's or something of that nature. And we've got a number of these. And then the other type are these kind right here, which are some of them are wall-to-wall buildings. Otherwise, they just kind of look a little bit more walkable and pedestrian friendly. So we've got a number of these. And then we also have gas stations. We've got 3 of those. They come in a variety of sizes. Again, because these are signature buildings, you can only place these 3, but it's still very nice to have them. One of the things that I love about these assets is if you look at each of them, they actually have the correct companies. So looking at this 2-star country hotel, it requires food and it sells lodging, which is exactly what I'd expect to see. For the supermarket, it sells food. For the petrol station, it sells petrochemicals. So they're doing exactly what they should be doing. But all in all, these are absolutely beautiful assets that I think most people are going to want to add to their builds, at least some of them. And I think the grocery store is probably going to make its way into basically everyone's builds. And finally, we have 78 props that come with this region pack. And this is really exciting because none of the other region packs came with any props. And I don't think that there are any other props even in the Paradox Mods workshop. So these are some of the first non-vanilla props that you can add to your game. And they show up in the vanilla game in the props menu. So these are exciting for a variety of reasons. First of all, you can see that we get a number of fence pieces. I think that these are all doors right here. We also get a number of ADU garden unit style structures. So you can imagine this being a garden office or something of that nature. Then we have a number of sheds. We have some clotheslines that you might see in someone's backyard. Some hedgerows that curiously look better than the ones that came with the vanilla game. And then a number of fence pieces. So we've got stone fences, brick fences. We've got some stucco fences over here, some wrought iron fences. And you might be thinking to yourself, why am I excited about these? These are going to be very tedious to place one by one. And indeed they would be. If you have mods right now and you have the line tool, you should be able to place these with relative ease. And you'll also be able to delete them with relative ease as well, because they are props and not net lines. I always have trouble deleting net lines. It always becomes an issue, and these should be simpler because they're props. Secondly, there is a vanilla line tool on the way. The Detailers patch number 2 is supposed to include it. They talked about it on the Paradox forums a while back. And when that vanilla line tool comes out, I assume that you'll be able to add props in a line. And as a result, you should be able to add fences in a line, which is why I'm so excited about all these fence pieces. Then finally, we've got a couple of other commercial props, a couple of trash cans, as well as some shopping carts, which is neat if you want to create a shopping center. You have the ability to place some carts. This gives it a little bit more life. So all in all, I think that these are excellent additions to the game. I think it was really forward thinking of the asset creators to add these to their assets as props so that we could access them in game later. I'm super thankful that these are props and not baked into the assets themselves. Super cool, very excited. I'm gonna use these all over the place. Next, we've got to talk Recolor, and it's kind of a mixed bag, but for the most part, it seems like most of the assets are receptive to Recolor. One thing I've noticed is that many of these single family homes and many of the assets in general that have stucco have Recolor applied to everything except for the stucco. So for instance, I have purple set to all of these, and you can see that the gray right here is going to maintain the grayness, although the roof color does change, which is really nice because a lot of times that's what separates different regions, is you'll have a red roof versus a black roof versus a green roof. So for most of the assets, or at least every asset that allows you to recolor, you have been able to change the roof, which is welcome. Some of these don't have the ability to recolor at all. So these are some of our terraced houses, and we can't even recolor this in the slightest. Same thing with this one. You can't recolor these. So it is, like I mentioned, a mixed bag. And look at this. For whatever reason, I can recolor this one, although it looks like it's just the roof and every other unit. So it's you know, your mileage may vary. Some of these you're going to be able to recolor no problem. Some of these you'll apply a recolor, and it appears that basically nothing has happened. Thankfully, it seems like many of the medium density and high density buildings do allow you to recolor. So if you paste these on there, you can see that basically this entire building has allowed me to recolor it, with the exception of the blue right here. The signature buildings are once again a mixed bag. Many of these don't have recolor available. However, it seems like many of the pubs do. And when you paste it on here, you can do kind of your worst to these buildings. Well, at least for some of them. This pub, for instance, only allows you to change the parts that are, again, not stucco. Moving along to our service buildings, there's only one building that allows you to recolor anything, and it's this suburban elementary school. So when we paste our purple on there, you can see that the accent color right here changes along with the color of the bricks. All of the white accents will remain white, but that does give you a fair bit of customization, even if it is for only this one asset. And then for our props, you're able to recolor all of the sheds and all of the garden units, as well as the garbage cans down here. But basically nothing else is recolorable. So you can't change the color of the fence pieces or anything like that. They just are what they are. Next, I want to get a feel for how these new assets feel relative to the old ones. So I'm coming back here to one of the oldest parts of Bend, and I'm going to wholesale replace every single building with the variant from the UK asset pack, and we'll see how it feels. Now, do know this is not a part of the mainline series, so if you're wondering about that, if we're going to change them out, we're going to do it during a Magnolia County episode. Next, I want to do a little bit of an experiment. I want to create a neighborhood main street. This is the kind of street that would serve a neighborhood or would even be the main street in a small town. So I want this to be highly walkable, and really that was always my vision for Dean Street right here. Heck, we have a tram and a really special station right here. And even with all of that, we have a bunch of auto-oriented uses here. And even the uses that aren't auto-oriented are definitely feeling like they are catering to autos and not to pedestrians. So I'm going to replace all of these buildings right here with some of our mixed housing from the UK pack, and I want to see how it feels relative to this stuff that we just took a look at. Now, this is my first attempt at using these assets, and I'll tell you what, this fits the character of what I was thinking for this area a ton more. Very walkable, the buildings are pulled right up close to the street, and they're really prioritizing pedestrianism. This is a place where you'd expect that people walk from store to store, not drive from place to place, and it makes sense considering we have the tram here. And I actually kind of like these larger buildings because it feels like over time, some of these row home looking buildings were redeveloped into these buildings. These are kind of 70s style, brutalist buildings, the kind of thing you might expect to see over here. And then at the end right here, I decided to try to go with those 1x4 assets to see what we came up with here. And honestly, these are super attractive. The one thing that's a little bit strange is I was kind of expecting to see some of the lower kind of Main Street looking buildings that you'd see in America, and none of those spawned for me. So I'm gonna plop a couple of those just to see how it looks. And here we go. It's a much shorter building. The roofs are completely flat, and this is what you see all over the place, at least here in the US, and oh my goodness. These look outstanding, particularly these ones at the end with the brick. I love these so much. I'm going to use these things everywhere. This is the asset that I've been looking for forever. It is absolutely wonderful. Wow. These are game changers. These are absolutely game changers. And these are the kinds of streets that I think are really special and the kind that you want to focus around transit corridors like the one that we're looking at right now. Next, I want to encourage you to take a look at the assets. I mean, really take a look at them. Go into photo mode and zoom in because you're going to see some incredible details. Look at this. On the roof, there is moss. It's not perfectly clean. Unlike the rest of the assets in the game, this has been lived in. This has existed. This has a history, and I absolutely love that. And this kind of history, the dirt underneath the windows, that little bit of grime, that little bit of lived-in feel, all of the assets have those all over the place. And it just makes every single building feel a little bit more real to me. I absolutely love that. I mean, these assets, all the way down to where you place the key, it's all been beautifully created. And I'm blown away. Now, this really shines in buildings that aren't supposed to look good, like this gas station right here. It has a rusty roof. There's a bunch of moss growing right here in what I presume is the building where, yeah, it's the building where you go and pay for your gas. There are stains on the roof of this canopy right here. Makes a ton of sense. I love this level of detail, but I hate doing it myself. I don't want to place a million decals. I want the assets to look like they've been lived in. And all of these assets have that character. So I think that you're all going to probably really appreciate that when you spend a little bit of time with these assets. But the other reason why I want to encourage you to look at these assets in a high level of detail is that there are Easter eggs throughout all of them. And for any asset that Mac Welshman put together, you're going to notice that he's taken the time to hide his logo. So right there at the top of this sign for this gas station, you'll see that there is the Mac Welshman logo right there, which is a super cool Easter egg. I want to say that Mac has actually been doing this for quite some time on many of his assets. So it's kind of a fun mini game. If you have a little bit of time and you want to find these logos, look throughout the assets. They're hidden all over the place. Little Where's Waldo in every single asset. Super cool of Mac to do that. It's that little bit of playfulness that I really appreciate. And honestly, it makes me love this region pack even more. One final thought about looking at all of these assets up close. I would highly encourage you to do so at night as well, because oh my goodness, the lighting on these assets is outstanding. It feels like the buildings are three-dimensional, like you can look right into the building and see what's going on. The lighting is absolutely exceptional on every single building. It's really outstanding how much attention to the small details you can see throughout all of these assets. The lighting though is kind of next level, and I love that level of detail because you can just tell the care and attention that's been put into each and every one of these assets. Love them so much. And honestly, I think that none of the assets demonstrate this more than the signature buildings. I mean, look at this. You got this light lighting up the Brian sign. You've got that lighting that's lighting up the ground right here in this fancier pub. You got the great lighting at the store. Everything just feels awesome here. Architectural lighting on the hotels, it's really exceptional. Just a really exceptional job. Absolutely fantastic assets. And with that, we have the UK region pack. And I'm going to be upfront with you. I'm absolutely blown away by this one. I'm going to be using these assets everywhere. I don't think that there are any that I'm going to shy away from because they all fit so many different types of locations. Even though this is a UK inspired pack, it's very clear to see that with a couple of tweaks, like the tweaks I made to the roofs over in Bend, you can make these feel North American. A grocery store, those are ubiquitous. The elementary school and the high school, those fit in basically any build. The high density buildings, they'll fit basically any build as well. So I think that there's a lot of flexibility with these assets, regardless of whether you're making a build inspired by the UK or something that's in North America, in Australia, in New Zealand, or in some other part of Europe. I think that some assets in this pack will work for you. Now, again, the size of this is pretty extreme. It's 7 gigs, but I think if you have the space for it, this is a no-brainer. This is one that I would absolutely pick up immediately. I love this pack. This is absolutely wonderful. I think that the asset creators, Mac Welshman and Rick 4000, should feel really, really proud of what they've put together because this is absolutely outstanding. And with that, we're going to leave it here. And I really hope that you've enjoyed this one. If you did, please hit the like button. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. And I want to thank you so much for your time. There's a million things that you could have been doing. You decided to go over this region pack with me, and I really appreciate that. If you want to download it for yourself, there is a link in the pinned comment in the description. Again, it's 100% free. Super cool that these are being released in that manner. And really, it sets the bar really, really high for the rest of them. And honestly, it sets the bar super high for any future paid content as well, because this is pretty impressive. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.